Hello, I'm Michael Hainsworth. Toronto is responsible for generating 1 out of every $3 of the entire country's gross domestic product. So why is its budget such an enigma? The city has a healthy surplus, but you wouldn't know it from the repeated tax hikes and calls of crying poor. This is Bill Robson and Nick Dahir. The president and CEO and the research officer at the C.D. Howe Institute say the proposed 6.9% property tax increase for 2025 is a nasty shock, not just because we had one the year before. They argue taxes are being collected and spent without formal council approval. They join us now. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michael.
Bill, how is it possible that the city cries broke every year, yet you tell me there are annual surpluses?
Well, the fact that there are annual surpluses is a peculiar secret for one reason, which is that the city publishes an annual report every year, gets a clean audit, and on one page, seriously on one page, all the revenues and expenses are there, and the bottom line we don't have the 2024 results yet, it's too early, but in 2023, they had a pretty healthy surplus, $1.25 billion roughly. The surplus the previous year was even bigger, but people very rarely look at the financial statements. It's kind of the past. It's maybe not that interesting. They do look at the budget, and when they look at the budget, there is absolutely no way from this mess that's presented to council and to taxpayers for anybody to anticipate how big the surplus is. The budget and the financial statements, they simply don't match. And it's a very strange situation that, as you said, a city of this size and importance would have a budget-making process that is this chaotic.
So are you telling me we did not need that 6.9% property tax increase?
I think that we are going to discover at the end of the year that the city ran another substantial surplus. Now, let me just say that I don't mind surpluses. It's a very good thing for governments to run surpluses. When you think of a city particularly, the surpluses that they run are invested in capital assets, which is what cities are mainly about, is providing all the infrastructure that makes daily life possible. So surpluses are good. But what is not good is for the city to have a budget process that is almost panicky in the intensity with which we're warned about the need for these big tax hikes, or there will be cuts to policing, there will be cuts to various other types of services. When you look at the financial statements, another thing that you see besides this extraordinarily large positive number on the bottom line is they often fail to meet their spending goals for various programs. So they're actually not even delivering on what they say they have budgeted to do. So these big surpluses are kind of nice to have. I wouldn't mind if the province of Ontario or other provinces had surpluses like that. I would love to see the federal government running a surplus. But the trouble is, it's kind of inadvertent. People don't realize it's happening. And so as a result, you get this, as I say, kind of this panicky feeling around budget time. And a lot of decisions are being made on the fly by people who just do not have the big picture in their heads.
So, Nicholas, when you did your research, you saw that there is no accountability for what the budget allocates in a given year and then what's actually spent.
Well, it's very hard to set up that chain of accountability. I go through every page of the budget and the financial statements every year, and it is very hard to put the picture together, much harder than it should be. For example, if you just go to the Toronto budget page, there are over 150 some documents available, to the point where they need a guide to instruct people on how to retrieve precisely what they need. And then you look at the budget at the start of the year, the numbers that are presented are in a totally different universe than the numbers that are in the financial statements at the end of the year, making comparisons between them impossible for non-experts and difficult for even experts.
Well, maybe I'll jump in and say, if we had a chief financial officer of Toronto or any city, because municipal budgeting in Canada generally is a bit of a mess, present in this conversation, they would probably be explaining to us or trying to explain why you simply can't do it to line them up the way that Nick is saying that they ought to do. I'll just mention the province of Ontario because it's the province that Toronto is in. as an example of exactly the opposite kind of presentation. Every year when Ontario presents its provincial budget, you will see the previous year's results in one column, and then you'll see the budget in the next column, and the lines all correspond. Now, I'm not making a comment about whether Ontario's fiscal policy is wise or foolish, but the point is that as soon as you are looking at those numbers, you're able to say, okay, well, healthcare spending is shown to change by this much, education spending by this much, and so on down the line. You're able to compare the projections with the past, which you would think would be kind of a normal thing to do. And in Ontario, they do it, so why can't they do it in Toronto?
In fact, the city does, in the comments we receive from them, they do note that they do provide comparisons to previous years, but they're not in the main budget document that is presented. I'd like to touch on the accountability point again, because there's a lot of problems on that front, even before going into the substance. So first of all, they're late. The fiscal year starts January 1st, but Toronto just approved its budget in February 11th. This isn't good. Things are still happening during the year, but this is being done without our representatives having a say on it. Now, they note that they have interim plans, but this is not the way it should be. Either the calendar year matters or it doesn't. And I mean, if you want to hold them to account, you need to be able to look through the budget and understand what it's trying to tell you. For Toronto, the numbers are buried. They're split up. There's not one number that says what the city is spending this year or how much revenue it's collecting. And this is made all the more troubling by the budget process. So Toronto is subject to the strong mayor powers. And they have a special way that they can present their budget. So the mayor has until February 1st to table a budget, at which point the city councilors can either propose amendments or not propose amendments, in which case it's approved. Now this, reliance on councilors to have their say in the budget process be through amendment sort of necessitates them needing to have a clear understanding of what the budget is saying, and they don't have that. So that is deeply troubling from an accountability standpoint.
But I thought Ontario's premier gave the mayor of Toronto and other mayors across the province so-called strong mayor powers, ostensibly to ram through housing-related projects. But you're saying this has the ability to override councillors when it comes to establishing budgets and accountability for them, so this has made the situation worse.
Yeah, the councillors, it's always better for accountability and transparency if I can look through the minutes of a meeting and go, this councillor voted yes, this councillor voted no. That's no longer the case. The power is concentrated in the mayor's office.
So councillors aren't really accountable anymore?
Well, they certainly aren't getting the budget information ahead of the beginning of the year with time to consider it and then approve or not before the fiscal year begins. It will be very simple to change the legislation in that respect. It's not clear to either of us why the province wrote the legislation that way, but it's if you think of the provincial government, their fiscal year runs from April 1st to March 31st. And there's a pretty strong imperative for the provincial government to get its budget out before April 1st for the same reasons that Nick was just describing. You want your elected representatives to have time to have an informed say, and you want them to have a formal process for approving or disapproving, because that's sort of the basis of representative government, that your elected people get to decide what your tax burden is going to be. So why would you have set it up in a way that the mayor is putting something in front of council when the fiscal year is already well underway, and a lot of the grants and things that need to happen as of January 1st are basically already set? It's a silly problem to have created, and it's easy to fix.
And it is not by any means binding. I mean, the just adding to the confusion of why Toronto does this way is simply looking at the next largest city in Ontario, Ottawa, which is subject to strong mayor powers, but they approve their budget before the start of the fiscal year. They have they present the budget using the same accounting that they do in their financial statements, so you can compare the two, and they present it right up front, all in one table. So it just adds to the confusion as to why Toronto can't seem to do that. And in terms of transparency, I get the impression that the city is very proud of their consultation process, and I like a good consultation process. I was on the bus in recent months, and I see the banner, Budget Toronto, have your say, come and consult, and that's good. We need that, especially in a democracy, but it's undercut by the fact that how can I consult on the next budget if I'm unclear as to what my starting point is, what I'm suggesting, and even harder to figure out once the budget is approved if my concerns were reflected at all.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this one particular aspect. I took accounting in grade 11, mostly because there was a pretty girl in the class, but I did pay attention. However, Bill, help me wrap my head around this, because you described the way that the city accounts for long-lived capital assets is akin to the way it allocates buying a cup of coffee. How so?
One of the biggest discrepancies between the budget and the way that the results are reported at the end of the year, which is consistent with public sector accounting standards, gets clean audit, it's all good, is the treatment of capital assets. So you've got, especially with cities, very capital intensive governments, all of the things that will deliver services over many years should be written off over the time that you expect them to deliver their services. It doesn't make sense. If you're Toronto, you've got a big transit system with a lot of long-lived trains, for example. So you want to be writing those off over a period of many years, over the time you expect that they're going to be delivering their services. And it's a bit of a holdover from history that cities generally budget capital on a cash basis. And that makes a huge difference if you're showing these things in the budget as though, going back to the cup of coffee analogy, as though a subway train were something that you used up after, the additional outlay was that, and the whole thing was gone. The other thing, though, that I might just segue from that discrepancy to reinforce the point that Nick made about the difficulty that a person, even an expert, but certainly a non-expert, is going to have making sense of these documents at all. Because I think one of the things that happens, and this happens among councillors as well as among the people who vote for them, is they don't understand the documents they're being given, but they don't want to say that they don't understand them. It's natural when you're looking at something confusing like this to think there must be something wrong with your understanding. You took accounting in grade 11, and you might be thinking you were paying too much attention to your classmate and not enough attention to the lessons that you were learning. But if you look at the financial statements, it's pretty clear. All you need to be able to do is add and subtract. And the budget could be presented that way, but it isn't. And as a result, a lot of people are disengaging, and they think that it's a problem with them as opposed to a problem with the way the budget's presented. It's not you. That's one of our key messages with this report. It's not you, it's them. They could give you numbers that you can understand, and they're not doing it, and that's the problem.
And it is crucially important that these documents be accessible to anyone who can read, add, and subtract. It's all of our money. We all should be able to form rational opinions on these things. And if we can't, it undermines the entire process. But I'd like to touch on another point Bill made about the treatment of capital expenditures in the budgets, and just the gulf between how they present it at the start of the year all up front and at the end of the year over the lifetime of the assets, is that when councillors, especially those who, we don't want to live in a world where all city councillors are accountants. It's good that there's a diversity of expertise among our representatives, but if they don't know, these nuances of the accounting, they'll see these big, eye-popping $60 billion number over the next 10 years, and it frightens them. It induces them to raise more money up front than they otherwise might if they were presented this plan on the financial statements basis, and it might induce them to, once they approve it and once the outlays are approved, they don't look at it ever again. And that's not the way it should be. These things are long, years-long projects, and they require attention over the course of their lifetime.
Nick, this is the first time you and I are having this conversation, but Bill, I got to tell you, it feels like Canada geese flocking back to cottage country every spring. We have this conversation about clear, timely, and standardized budgets every year. What's your advice to a city councillor who feels railroaded?
Well, the first thing that I would advise the city councillor is, if you don't understand the documents you're being shown, don't be afraid to put up your hand and say so. It's undoubtedly the case that a lot of other people are feeling the same way, because even experts have trouble with this stuff. And it's important that somebody should break the ice and get that conversation going about how the numbers could be more clearly presented. And they mustn't accept such explanations as, this is how we've always done it, because naturally that kind of rules out improvement. They should not accept explanations such as, well, it'd be a lot of work to present the numbers on the same basis as the financial statements. Because just to underline a point that we made earlier, when you go to the financial statements, you get to see the budget as it would have looked if they had presented it consistently with how they do their financial statements. It's all there. They had to do the calculations. So why is it any more work to do it at the beginning of the year than it would be at the end of the year? And indeed, as Nick was saying, a lot of the calculations are done. If you know where to look, you can get at some of these translations. It'd be so straightforward to do that at the beginning of the year. No more work, but way more enlightening, because councillors would be able to see the difference. And we have seen, Nick mentioned Ottawa. If you go across the country, you'll see a number of municipalities that have improved their budget presentations a good deal. British Columbia municipalities are particularly good for giving at least some of the numbers, the key numbers that you need for revenue and expense and the bottom line up front in the budget. There is no reason why Toronto couldn't do it. And what's needed is for councillors to say, you're giving me numbers I don't understand. I know you can give me numbers I can understand, so do it.
And I'd like to touch on that point too. Toronto has but the budget documents they present have a simplicity problem. I alluded to earlier over 150 links on their main webpage. I heard from an official recently who said, "Oh, we do compare our budget with results from the previous years. They're in analytical note, 75, buried under multiple pages on a web page." That is not as useful as having one document that tells the whole story.
And you can do it. You can do it on page 5, a table of contents. Have a pretty cover, table of contents, and put it on page 5. There are plenty of examples. Other governments in the country, some municipalities, certainly the federal and provincial governments, where you get the numbers right up front. So why not do that?
We talked about this perception that Toronto is just in the hole, in the red. But if you were to just ask someone on the street, did you know Toronto has a $1.25 billion surplus? It would knock their socks off. That should not be the case. That is a sign of problems with the way the public municipal finances are reported to the public.
So, Nick, when you did your research and you did the compare and contrast, because they weren't giving it to you easily, what was one of the things that jumped out at you as this was what was expected and this is what it actually cost at the end of the day?
It's honestly hard to make that analysis because they don't aggregate these things the same way. The financial statements will have the police budget and other line items that just don't exist in the budget documents. The 2025 budget, if you go onto the webpage now, you're met with two main, among the 150 links, I stress that point, you're met with two main links. One is a PowerPoint presentation, which is full of graphs and interesting graphics that have numbers in them.
But no hard data.
No
CVS downloadable file.
Yeah, no. It's not presented in a. It's a PowerPoint presentation. I don't even necessarily. Yeah, and the other document is essentially a sterile Excel sheet printed out, and you simply, I mean, cannot compare that to the financial statements at the end of the year. But one stark contrast, and Bill touched on this point earlier, is that if you look at the budget numbers that they present in their financial statements, again, something we stressed that they could simply put into the main budget document, is that, actual expenses were under the budgeted expenses by $1.8 billion. That is quite a stark figure. And the explanation they'll give for this is that, we couldn't spend on all the programs in the way that we wanted to during the year because of various reasons. It seems to happen a lot. The accumulated surplus for Toronto is $33 billion. So, perhaps at some point it would be better to recalibrate the budget if this keeps happening, if that's the case.
What we could do, Michael, maybe is just to put up the link on the video to the financial statements for 2023 and maybe 2024 when they come out. Won't be for a while yet. But people can see for themselves just how consistently short of budget the expenses were. And again, just to go back to the sort of fundamental problem here, the numbers that you see in that budget column are not numbers that you saw in the budget. So the city did fail to spend as much as it had intended to do on a variety of things, including some of the social programs that you hear the mayor particularly emphasizing are so key to why we need the big property tax increase. The other thing too, if you did an accounting or a degree, or even if you're interested and you've gotten to the financial statements, is to look at the city's balance sheet. It does have a healthy accumulated surplus. A lot of that is invested in capital assets, so that's all good. But here's a surprise. You asked about things that would make people's eyebrows go up. The city holds a ton of cash. The city of Toronto has a lot of cash. And why is the city holding a lot of cash? We pay taxes so that it can deliver services. We pay taxes so that it can invest in roads and sewers and so on. But we don't pay taxes so that they can have a very large amount of liquid assets that are earning like you would earn in a savings account. And one of the reasons that's happening is because of this capital problem. They have development charges that developers will pay well in advance of when the project is getting built, well in advance of when the infrastructure that the development charges are supposed to pay for is getting built. And so the city carries all this cash. So it's a very irksome thing to be told year after year that the city has a real budgeting problem, and if we don't pay another big tax increase, we're going to see all these cuts to services, when if you look at the financial statements, you notice these two things. They tend not to spend what they budgeted. Of course, they didn't really know that they were budgeting those amounts for the reasons we've discussed, and they also have all this cash. Why do they have all this cash? That's not why we pay taxes.
So then what do you say to a Torontonian facing a 6.9% property tax increase after a 9.4% increase the year before?
Well, you are very right to be skeptical about the need for this tax increase. If you have a sense that the city isn't run very well financially, you're onto something. The key thing to remember, if you do look at the Toronto City budget and you're not able to make sense of it, is that there's nothing wrong with you. There is something wrong with the budget, and you should be talking to your councillor. You should be talking to city staff if you're motivated. If you get a chance to talk to the mayor, tell these people they should be presenting a budget that makes sense and that anybody who's motivated and can add and subtract can understand.
As of now, the way they produce the budgets, not meeting the mark.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill Robson is the president and CEO of the C.D. Howe Institute. Nicholas Dahir is an institute researcher. For further insight into Toronto's annual budget woes, the impact on the public purse, and the call for greater accountability, visit cdhowe.org. I'm Michael Hainsworth. Thank you for joining us.
You've been listening to the C.D. Howe Institute podcast with Michael Hainsworth. Subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. The C.D. Howe Institute is an independent, not-for-profit research institute whose mission is to raise living standards by fostering economically sound public policies. The Institute is widely considered to be Canada's most influential think tank and a trusted source of essential policy intelligence, distinguished by nonpartisan, evidence-based research and subject to definitive expert review. Visit cdhow.org and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you.